let's take a back up a little bit though. Um, it wasn't until the late 1700s, up until this time, now we knew that people were coming from the east, moving into Michigan, and we had all of this land. Well, the government starts to divide up the land, and Michigan becomes part of what's called the Northwest Territory in 1787, and it includes Michigan, it includes Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and a little bit up here um, as well. So this was all the Northwest Territory. This new law um, comes into effect. And in the Northwest Territory, the nation is starting to divide not only into just chunks, but these chunks, its territories, are now going to want to split off and we're going to want to be their own state. But in order to become a state, certain things had to happen. And it was one of the questions that you had to answer. So first thing that had to happen is you had to have a territory. It couldn't just be any big piece of land, it had to be a territory. And in that, but the territory did not choose its leaders. The president, who's farther away over in the East Coast, he's going to choose the leaders of these territories. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that's a particularly good idea. It would be like living here in Michigan and somebody from Maine being your leader. They're going to govern what happens here. But in any case, that's the way it was to start out with. So the president's going to pick four leaders, and those leaders are a governor and three judges. They're going to be the ones that are going to lead, right? That was the first step that had to happen. Then, in step two, to get to that step, in that area, there had to be 5,000 free adult men. Now, sorry, girls, women don't count. Indians don't count. Slaves don't count. They weren't counted in those 5,000. Okay? It's going to be that way for another 130 years. And that's just the way it was at the time. And they called this group of people, they could vote now. These group of people could vote for lawmakers. Not these men, only the men could vote for the lawmakers. They called a legislature. And the governor is going to approve all the laws. So that's in step two. Once they reach that point, they're going to move on. Now, the key in step three is to reach 60,000 people. Once those 60,000 people have lived there, then you could start moving ahead in the process. Indians and slaves still won't count. Now, notice it doesn't say anything about women at this point, but Indians and slaves still didn't count. It's believed that the women counted in those 60,000, but women still couldn't vote. Okay, so then Congress has to decide if it can become a territory. If they say yes, I mean, if it can become a state, if they say yes, then fantastic. It's a state, then it's equal to all the other states. Okay. But the big question was who has the power? Who has the power? And again, it does not mention women in here. It does say free adult men, and women can't vote, not for another 130 years. Slaves couldn't vote. The president said who was in charge. And again, I said, I'm not sure I like this idea, right? Because maybe it's going to be the wrong person that's put in charge. Maybe it's somebody that's not the best person for this area. So some of the key points about this law, this new law becoming a state, were that no new slaves could be brought here. Now that I think was a good thing, my opinion. Here, if we're going to be a state, we can't bring any new slaves into the state. However, people who had slaves could keep those slaves. Second, Indians, Native Americans, had to be treated fairly. No more land could be taken away from them. So those treaties that they were given, none of more of that could happen. You decide on what you feel about that one. And then starting schools was encouraged. Now, you may not think that's such a great thing. I don't know. I think I want to be back in school. But starting schools is encouraged. So lawmakers felt that education was very important. This was part of the key points here. And there were some reasons for those schools to start. And those could be that young people knew about religion. That was very important at the beginning of our country. Religion was the basis for our country. A whole lot different today, unfortunately. And they can help teach each other about what's right and wrong in a school. They can give students useful knowledge. So schools are really important. The school you see here in this picture is in Douglas, Michigan. Now, Douglas, Michigan is, well, I guess we could say it's, if you look over here in this picture on the right, it's kind of right in this area here. Okay. But even with that law, the tribes didn't get good deals for their land. It was kind of like, can't move them off, but we're still not going to give them a good deal. They can't make people, laws can't make people do the right thing, unfortunately. People are still going to do what's wrong. So people had to do what was really in their hearts. Now let's go on to the leaders of our country. Lewis Cass is an important man. Still today, we have a street in Detroit called Cass Avenue. There's a Cass Tech High School. Things are named after him. So our territory needs this new leader. And remember that the leaders are chosen by the president. So the president originally chose General Hull for our first governor. And then remember, he had that problem in the War of 1812 where he gave up Detroit, and people were really upset about that. And then we got a couple other governors for our territory at the time. But finally, Lewis Cass was given that job, and he took over as governor of the territory. And he really worked to help Michigan grow. He made treaties. He explored to find new parts of the land. And he invited people to come visit and to come bring their families here. So he was really pumping it up, right? So today we have places like Cass City and Cassopolis that are named after him, as well as Cass Tech High School and Cass Avenue in Detroit. So really, who was Lewis Cass? We have a little background of him on page 173, and how he kind of got here with his family um, through um, through working in the national government. And when he did that, he left Washington, D.C., and he eventually served in Michigan as U.S. Senator and ran for president later in 1840s. So this is a long ways off yet. So he's quite important to our history. I'm going to move on to another young leader. Now, this man was very interesting. His name was Stevens T. Mason. And yes, he was the son of John Mason. That's not the important point about him, though. He kind of got into politics just kind of by accident. He enjoyed what he was doing. He enjoyed being with his father, and his father had to go do something, and so his father asked as President Jackson, if he could take over while he was gone, and President Jackson agreed. At that time, he became a secretary for the Michigan Territory at 19 years old. But um, people weren't so happy having a 19-year-old in charge of things. He became known as he was a young boy, and it would be like you being in charge of your parents, you being in charge of your household. How do you think your parents would like it? Or maybe even one of your friends being in charge of your household. How would you like that? Okay. So Stevens T. Mason decides that he is going to kind of get people to listen to him. And he um, took advice from people. And that was really important because here's this young boy who's still learning. And instead of him deciding that he's going to tell everybody his ideas, he's going to talk to the people and get their ideas. And they like that. And over the next few years, he's going to have a lot of work to do. He was eventually given the job as our first state governor, but we haven't become a state yet. And when that happens, he's known as the boy governor. So the thought is, hey, we're ready. We've got what we need. We've got the people we need. We need the 60,000 people. He makes that happen to become a state. So the people of Michigan decide they want to be a state. Remember, we had the people coming on from the Erie Canal, the people from the east. So our population is growing. By 1834, we had over 60,000 people and enough to become a state. So we asked Congress. Remember, you ask Congress, Congress has to decide. And Congress said, hey, hold on, not so fast. Hold your horses. There's a problem here. Congress had these new states. They didn't want to start new states. And here's why. We had this argument with Ohio. one of the early maps we had of Michigan kind of has Michigan tilted. When you watch the video that I have for you, you're going to see kind of a new map. And there was this area we call the Toledo Strip right here. And the border from Michigan really, there really was no border right in this area. So when Michigan decided they were going to be the state, they drew their border here. But Ohio saying, no, our border is here. So it's this little strip of land that they started to argue over. And that argument became what was known as the Toledo War. And I say war kind of in quotations because there really wasn't any major fighting war. As a matter of fact, only one person was injured in this war, in this argument. But ultimately, what happened was, as you read, um, ultimately what happened was we were given the Upper Peninsula, the western part of the Upper Peninsula, by President Jackson in return for the city of Toledo going to Ohio. So it was kind of a trade, and it worked out well for us because what people thought was a frozen wasteland now produced a lot of trees and a lot of forests for us. Right. So in this fight, it's kind of how we got the nickname Wolverines, because a Wolverine is a nasty, mean animal, and so that's what the Ohioans called us. They called us nasty Wolverines, and we got that nickname, the Michigan Wolverines. So once this happened, our population is going to start growing, right? The country is going to start taking what we call a census, and that happens to be a census year this year, where the government is going to count the number of people in the area, different areas in the states, counties, different areas. That happens every 10 years. So these censuses were being taken. And if you look at the population in this green box, you'll see the differences in the changes in population. And the important one to note is right in here. Between 1830 and 1834, we go from 31,000 people to 87,000 people, almost 32,000 people. So we have a huge, huge jump in population right in here. And that's right before Michigan becomes a state, which is in 1837. And in that time, from 1834 to 1837, we have almost a 90,000 jump in population. Here we have about a 56,000 people from 1830 to 1834. And then from 1834 to 1837, we have approximately 90,000, almost 90,000 more people. So it's really important to know that between the years of 1830 and 1840, our population grew hugely, if you want to call it exponentially. It was the biggest population growth that we have had. Okay? So then the question is Michigan's capital. Where do we have Michigan's capital? Well, originally, Michigan's capital was in Detroit. And then kind of get that video the other day. We learned how Lansing became our capital. Some people wanted a town called Marshall to be our state capital. There were all kinds of places that people wanted. But Detroit stayed the capital until 1847, right? And eventually it got moved to Lansing. And the biggest reason for it being moved to Lansing was the fact that it was in the middle of our state. And even though it was really nothing there, eventually it didn't take long before growth happened around Lansing. So the location was perfect, and Lansing became our state capital. On this page, you see a timeline of dates that are very important to you, beginning in 1805 when it became a territory, to 1825 when the Erie Canal opened, to 1834, which is the time of the Toledo War, and finally 1837, Congress decides, yes, Michigan can become a state. So that's kind of a recap of lesson 5 for you. That takes us to the end of the chapter. So today what I want you to do is I want you to finish questions 6 and 7, and that will be it for today. You have your study guide to work on your test and start working and studying for your test, and that will be on Thursday. So good luck on your assignment, study away, and I will see you on probably Thursday.